Welcome, everybody. This is Partners in Conversation. My guest today is Mr. Larry Brewer. Welcome, Larry.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm fine. I'm fine. Yeah, it's a beautiful day outside.
It is wonderful.
Yeah.
So we're talking with Larry about equity and social justice for our series on race, social justice, and the community.
Mm-hmm.
Larry is a founder and community organizer with the South Shore Dance Alliance, and he will talk to us a little bit about this. But first, I want to give our listeners a little background of what prompted this conversations with the community. We're focusing on equity and social justice. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd died during an arrest in Minneapolis, Minnesota, for allegedly using a fake $20 bill. Soon after the incident, we've seen large crowds of protesters. The incident was recorded by bystanders, so everyone in America, in other countries, saw almost live what was going on with the arrest of Mr. Floyd. We've seen in many cities across the US and in many other countries, large protests which continue today. So Larry Brewer, founder of the South Shore Dance Alliance and an incredibly important person in the community, a community organizer, will discuss with us issues of equity and social justice in our community. So I have a few questions, and then I will let Larry talk freely about anything else. But first, we want to ask you, Larry, to tell us about yourself, what led to your career as an artist, and to your influential position in the community.
Well, I started dancing when I was very small. Growing up in Arkansas, in the rural farm, the kids were oftentimes the entertainment. So I can remember when I was younger, I guess 2, 3 years old, somewhere around in there. We used to, we didn't have anything, we had a radio. And then there was a potbelly stove in the middle of the floor. So when company came over, they sat around and listened to the radio and, talked about the events that was going on and all that kind of stuff. Kids were seen and not heard. In our case, we weren't seen. They sent us to our room. And so we would look through the crack of the door to try to catch somebody's attention so they could ask what we were doing. And then eventually we'd get invited out to dance. So I started dancing back then. And it went from the living room to the honky tonks to where we moved to Chicago. We was in dance contests and stuff like that. And eventually, I really didn't start formal training until I was adult. But because of that long history of dance, it didn't take me long to incorporate the dance technique, ballet and modern and all that stuff into what I was doing. And so once I found myself in a place where I could no longer dance professionally, I started teaching. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to have an impact that was different from the one that I had, even though we had similar paths, I guess. There were a lot of people that took an interest in me because they thought that I had some talent. And so I got a lot of help that was free. And so I wanted to do the same thing. And at the same time, I didn't think that I should just be teaching by myself. I wanted to bring in other people so that the kids would experience different styles, different teaching styles, different dance techniques, and so forth and so on. Also, a part of that was talking about social skills and your history and what you're going to face out here in the real world. Um, for me, growing up in Arkansas, I experienced firsthand the injustice, I guess you could call it, or discrimination. You know, I grew up in a time when they had signs that said you couldn't go to the certain bathroom or you couldn't drink off of a certain water fountain and things like that. I remember, again, this is as a relatively small child, that I had to go to the bathroom, and I asked my grandma, and my grandmama asked the woman that was running the kitchen where I should go, and she, without thinking, sent me out to the bathroom in the bar restaurant, right? So I walked out there, and I can remember the folks looking at me as I walked by, but I didn't think nothing about it at the time. And I went on in the bathroom and proceeded to relieve myself, you know. So while I was sitting on the toilet, a white man came in and acted like he was putting out a fire. He just back and forth, you know. And so I started crying, and I went to my grandmother, and my grandmother talked to the lady, and the lady went out to the bar or restaurant, and then she came back with a different kind of attitude and explained that the man said he didn't see me, and I wasn't supposed to be in that bathroom, and there's another bathroom, you know, whatever. But that was one of my first experiences where I knew that the man saw me, you know, I knew it. And the way he peed on me was definitely, I shouldn't have been there, or it was something wrong with that. That's why I started crying. And so that's my first experience. Uh, Today, what's going on is it's been an ongoing process. You know, it goes all the way back to when we first got off the first slave ship that put us here. It goes back to there. And for me, I think that, you know, we uh, are in a position where there is a potential for change, but there is a lot of pushback too. And so I think that one of the things that we have to do as a community is to reevaluate how we deal with these issues. I can look back to, you know, everybody was talking about the Tulsa massacre. They've been talking about that for a bit. You know, I was talking about it last year, actually. But it seems to me that whenever something like this happens, there is a outpouring of what you call it, anger, and then you have a lot of people, politicians and movie stars and corporations, businesses, and so forth and so on, that come out and make these statements about how this is injustice and how we need to change it, and, you know, go head on. Then we get people putting some money in the community. They put it in the hands of our social activists, or what I call poverty pimps, and they distribute money around the community and create programs that, again, in my humble opinion, are not sustainable. And everybody calms down, and we go back to business as usual. I've noticed banks and other people that get money from the Black community all making gestures. We're talking about how we believe in inclusion and diversity and all of that stuff, but they're still redlining. They're still um, um, giving you loans that are more or higher interest rates and all of that stuff. Um, the politicians come to you and they say how they're going to work to make this not be or eliminate it or whatever. And then they still go along with policies that institutionalize this racism. For me, I think that it's time for us to start or to go back to where we were when we had the Black Wall Street. You know, if people are gonna say we don't work hard enough, we don't deserve their support and whatever, I think that we should start to look at how we spend our money. I think that we should not be tearing up our neighborhoods. I think that we should be sitting in groups in our communities and deciding how we're going to create sustainable economic development. Now that's, once that happens, you know, and if the banks are really truly interested in this whole social justice that I'm constantly seeing on my emails on my computer, then they will be more than happy to assist in this. Now, if the banks in America don't feel like they have an obligation to do this because they have made a lot of money off of us, then maybe we should start looking at some of the banks in Africa or some of these third world countries that are trying to come off and under the colonial hill. So if we can start to look at that kind of action and put together a plan for that kind of action, I think that we will get a better response from government and corporate America. Because right now, I think we spend probably more than $30 billion a year in this country. And we have very few things that we produce. So if we start to do like they did in Tulsa and Greenwood, where $1 circulates 19 times through Black hands before it leaves out of the community, we can actually start to create an economic base in our communities that can fund our schools and fund our infrastructure and help to deal with all of the social services that we need. Right now, we're talking about what they owe us. And I know that from 400 or 500 years or more of free labor, you know, we probably do need the reparations, you know, or deserve them. But I also know, because from personal experience, I have a number of people that owe me money. They owe me money. I also have a number of people that owe me money that I know ain't gonna never pay me. So my question is, you know, to everybody, I mean, you probably got somebody owe you some money that you know you ain't gonna never get back. So does that stop you from paying your house note?
No,
Does it stop you from making home improvements? You know, we know that we've been messed over, mistreated. We know that the justice system is not fair. You know, so what are we going to do about it? How are we going to stand up to this? You know, my thought is that we need to focus on developing our own stopgaps. You know, our communities are in situations where we, what is it, 6, 8 months ago, I was looking on the south side of Chicago news, and they had people marching, talking about they need a stronger police presence. Now we're talking about defunding the police. No, so for me, we need to start to police our own communities. We need to start holding people in our communities accountable. We don't need to be negotiating with street gangs. We need to be putting them on notice that we're no longer going to be held hostage by them.
Let me ask you, sorry if I interrupt, I just want to follow the script with the questions so that our listeners understand where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
I want to specifically to ask you about the police and the movement that we are witnessing right now. Do you think this is just about police brutality, or it's actually there is a lot more behind a more complex issue?
Oh yeah. It's not just about police brutality, because the police would not feel like they could do what they did or are doing if it was not something that was ingrained. People talk about, they say systemic racism. Okay. I believe that it goes beyond systemic, because you cannot have systemic if it's not a part of the culture. You know, the systems are developed by the culture. Okay, so if the people who run the systems, the banks, the justice system, political system, if the people that run those things are racist, then you're going to have systemic racism. I believe, and I, you know, since we've been dealing with this pandemic, I've been looking at a lot of documentaries and historical things like that, right? Because I'm in the house by myself all the time, right? So what I've seen is it's a cultural phenomenon. It's racism is a cornerstone in American culture. And until we can look at that and start to talk about how do we change that, the systemic racism is not going to change. It's going to continue to go. So first and foremost, folks have to look at what has happened in this country since we first landed here. Not just the African Americans. I'm talking about the Native Americans. I'm talking about the Mexicans. I'm talking about the Japanese. I'm talking about the Chinese. I'm talking about all these people, you know, and how they have been treated at different points in our history. You know, you cannot say that it was God's will for these Native Americans to be allergic to or not immune to smallpox after you give them poxy blankets. You can't say that that's God's will. It's your will. And that's what you did, you know, and then you demonize the Native Americans to make it it was justified in killing them. You know, which is the same thing that's happening today with African Americans. You know, I'm hearing all kind of different stories about that relationship between that police officer and Mr. Floyd. You know, I'm hearing that they knew each other. You know, so it was that there was some kind of a conflict or whatever an ongoing problem between the police officer and Mr. Floyd. I'm hearing that. I don't know. I can't verify it. But the fact that you can put your knee on a man's neck and keep him down until he's dead says that you believe that you have the authority to do that and you're not going to have any consequences. And that comes from a system that devalues human life. When you say that African Americans are somehow inferior or a mud race, then you don't believe that they are human. You don't believe they deserve the same treatment as you do. So no, it's not systemic, it's cultural.
Mm-hmm. So this is a great point, and you know very well the Gary community, and we're very since IUN is in Gary, we're very interested in understanding, have a deeper understanding of the community. And do you think what happened in Minneapolis could happen in Gary as well? And what is your understanding of the police and community relations in Gary?
You know, I think it'd be kind of difficult to see that happen in Gary, unless it's in the same kind of vein that I'm seeing that's starting to come out about this whole thing with Floyd and the police officers involved in that. What we've had in Gary is we've had problems with police corruption historically, and you know, going even further back than before when it was African American, before the end of the '60s, when Hatcher got elected, we had issues with the police, the racist stuff. I actually had encounters when I was in high school that were racist with the police, but we also had problems with police corruption in Gary after it was, you know, you had a Black police chief and so forth and so on. I think that when we talk about the police and you look at, you know, these people are from the communities, you know, and they represent the values of the communities. And so you get people, and I know people, I went to school with people that became police officers. You had Chief Mance on, what, last week or something, you interviewed
yes,
him?
We had him on the program, yes.
Yeah, well, he's, you know, we're good friends, actually.
It's a good guy.
He's, in my opinion, he's the example of what a police chief should be. And when we start to talk about how do we get police officers to be more culturally sensitive and responsive to the community, all members of the community, one of the things that I've seen coming from him and his police department, and I've seen this in Gary too, is that he has professional development trainings for his police officers. He has gone out and had, what do you call it, workshops to recruit minorities and women for the Griffith Police Department.
And that was in connection with IUN. So
right, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You coordinated that effort.
Right. So those kinds of things are what need to happen in the police departments. I think it was Michael Jordan actually donated $1 million to the police chief something or another, and then to the NAACP or one of those groups. He donated $1 million each for people to do training. I think that what I saw looking at police departments in Europe that have diverse populations, and they haven't had these kinds of problems. What I looked at was that their police departments actually have to have more education.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have ongoing training. And so therefore you have police departments over there that maybe killed one person in 10 years. Our people are coming out of high school, going to the police academy, and then going to the streets. One of the police officers in that Minnesota thing, he'd been on the job 3 days. And the guy who committed the crime was training him. So what kind of police officer was he going to develop into with the man who had all of these encounters with disciplinary actions and shot so many people before? That man was training this brand new police officer.
Mm-hmm.
So what you expect's going to happen? If you set up training, if you ask for a higher level of education, I think IU has a law. What is that law thing? A law, or what is it? Law enforcement training program. If we had those kinds of programs attached to the police academy, even, if we made it
cadet development program.
Right. If we had those kinds of programs attached to the police departments, we would, I ain't gonna say we'd eliminate it, but I think we would certainly bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
We'd bring it down, because the more people understand the cultural aspects of humanity,
mm-hmm.
the less they think it's something that's genetic. I think that once you understand the history of a people and what they've gone through, you're not so quick to say they do this because they're lazy. With the Tulsa massacre, and it was Rosewood and several other Black communities that were destroyed because they were too prosperous.
Mm-hmm.
So folks don't know that. Folks don't know that. I'm looking at some of my students talking about these communities and saying how it's not by accident that we don't even know about these communities.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to think about the people out in the rural communities and all of that stuff, they see us on TV running down the streets, marching and talking all that. They see the stuff about gangs and everything like that, and they don't know
mm-hmm.
that we had communities that were prosperous when we came out, at the end of slavery and at the end of Reconstruction, we went and built our communities, what they told us to do. They didn't want us in their community. We went and built our community. Our communities got prosperous. They was like, how dare they?
Mm-hmm.
So, but today folks don't know about that. And there's people that are spreading the poison by basically misrepresenting how we got to where we are.
Absolutely.
And because of that deprivation of information, we don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I had so many of my former students and students today telling me that they did not know about the Tulsa massacre. They didn't know about Rosewood. Those kinds of things. Actually, they don't know about the successful scientists and mathematicians and doctors that are out there today. Only thing they know about is basketball players that are making big money and football players that are making big money. But we have people that on all levels that are extremely successful.
It's true.
So we need to get that information out there. We need to get that to our kids.
Absolutely.
Then we need to get that to our kids.
So there is hope for the new generations always. And I want to say that we see these protests and we hope that the life of African Americans will change for the new generations. How do you think we could offer opportunities to youngsters for a more integrated life in the United States?
I think, honestly, I think that our focus at this point in time needs to be internal. I think that we need to focus on teaching our history. We need to focus on holding people in our community accountable, whether it's our leadership or whether it's the criminal element. People should be held accountable to what they're doing in the community. Our kids should not have to be making a choice between being in a gang or being considered square or getting beat up. They shouldn't have to make that kind of choice. They should be able to go to school and learn. I taught in Gary schools for almost 20 years, and I saw it on a daily basis, where kids who were wanting to learn and had come to school prepared to learn had to deal with the element that was just there. We need to look at that. We need to look at that, and we need to figure out how to address it. We need to look at our leadership and figure out how to address them. Because in Gary, I've seen over and over where we develop programs, we develop concepts of stuff, how we can create sustainable development, and only to see it evaporate because of mismanagement. So we need to look at that kind of stuff and hold those people accountable. We need to clean our house. And if we clean our house and show our kids that we are more than basketball players, and I don't have a thing against basketball players or sports, because sports is what gave me my leadership capacity. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
But when my daughter got accepted into Yale, prior to that, she was being recruited by all these Ivy League schools. I tried to get the Post-Tribune to do a story on that, because they were all about this basketball player who was getting recruited all over. Every day in the paper, you saw an article about where was this guy gonna go to play. Mm-hmm. And my daughter was being recruited by Yale, Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, all of that. And they flew her out there, just like they was doing that basketball player. When I talked to the news person, and at that particular time, it was the news editor, she told me that wasn't news. That wasn't news. And then proceeded to tell me how she knew people that was doing that. Well, I didn't. So obviously it's news. I didn't know my daughter doing it, and I'm thinking she's the only one, and you telling me that there's other people doing it. What wasn't news was this basketball player getting recruited, because they do that all the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has to change.
Mm-hmm. And we got little boys practicing basketball till late in the night, trying to be a professional basketball player. What if that same young man was practicing his mathematics and his science? Mm-hmm. Where would he be? So we got to look at that kind of stuff.
That's very important. Yes. So as an educator, you are prone to talk about education and information, and you want our youngsters to be aware of the past as much as the present.
Oh, yeah.
So let me ask you a question about IU Northwest. What kind of programs do you think we should be offering? You talked a little bit about the program for recruitment and formation of new police officers, various training programs, but what other programs do you think are needed to change the current scenario?
Well, I think that I use in a unique position here. I think that we should be, or the IU should be putting programs together that can help, that have an orientation towards sustainable economic development. So I think that there are some programs that are working within the community with like business incubator kind of things and stuff like that. I think those are very important because a lot of people, myself included, when I started the South Shore Dance Alliance, I had no idea about how to do bookkeeping and all that's just, the, what you call it, sustainable, what is it, sustainable planning and stuff like that. I didn't have any idea of how to do that. And then when I figured out that I needed to be doing that stuff, and all of a sudden I found myself in a place where it was so expensive that it was cost prohibitive. To get an accountant to do your bookkeeping, that's a lot of money. When you're talking about developing your growth plan, that's a lot of money to get a consultant or a workshop person to come in and help you do that kind of stuff. But if you do that stuff, you'll put yourself in a position where your business can flourish. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's one of the main things that need to happen. The other thing is a stronger relationship with the area schools. What we have in Gary in particular is we have a low tax base, right? So when we start talking about educational programs, we have to start cutting stuff that could be or is considered essential in some of the surrounding areas. Special education specifically, because we have communities that live in areas with high concentrations of lead and other types of pollutants. And these pollutants are responsible for high rates of, what do you call it, educational deficiencies, So we know that, but we can't afford to pay to have teachers that are experts in working with kids that have these special education issues. So if we were to have a program that brought young teachers in that were in their internships and stuff like that to work with the special education kids or the special education teachers, you know what I'm saying? And I don't mean work with them as we coming in to teach y'all how to teach. I'm talking about working with them to come in and say, oh, well, what can I do to help? Okay, we need to de-escalate this child. We can't put him out in the hallway by himself, but that teacher can put him out in the hallway and then be out there with him and do some individual intervention. I was down in some of the southern counties in Indiana, and their special education programs, they have that. They have the special education teacher, and then they have an aide in there, then they have an intern in there. And so when they get somebody that gets out of control, you know, somebody can go out in the hall with him and de-escalate him, give them that individual attention that they're looking for. We don't have that. We got one teacher teaching 30 kids, and they all, you know, on all different levels. That's what they said we have to do. We had to do when I was there. You know, you have one teacher. You got regular education kids. You got the advanced level kids. You got the special ed kids that have MIMH, regular mental deficiencies or whatever. You have all of them in the same classroom, and you're asking one teacher to develop a lesson plan that'll accommodate all them kids. And then you want to know why our test scores are low.
This highlights, obviously, the disparities that we see across communities in the United States based on the housing system, the property taxes, and income levels. So it's very sad. But I am very happy to hear that you have suggestions for IU Northwest. I know that CURE has put together several programs for free to the community, but we always welcome ideas about what kind of different programs could be useful for the community. So I am very grateful for this conversation. Larry Brewer, thank you so much. I think this has been a wonderful conversation with you, and I know our listeners will find it very informative and also very inspiring, because to see a community organizer of such caliber in the program is certainly inspiring and energizing. Is there anything else you want to tell us?
Well, I think that we cannot isolate, do it ourselves, by ourselves, but we can make choices ourselves. And once we decide our priorities, what our priorities are, then we can talk about what kind of help we need. Because what we need is to have a consensus on how we're going to move forward. You know, right now, I think that we're scattered. You know, I think we're scattered. I think that once the leadership, and I'm talking about leadership that includes the older people, you know, like myself, and the younger people. Because when I'm talking to my kids, my former students and stuff like that, when I look at what they're saying in their conversations on Facebook and stuff like that, there's some really bright young minds out there, and they want to see the communities do better. It's just that we have to bring everybody to the table and sit down and figure out how to do that. The other thing is we have to put the egos down. You know, we have to put the egos down, because I want to say that my opinion is my opinion. You know, now I got some factual basis too, but my opinion is my opinion. I don't know everything, and I don't have the solution for everything. I can bring something to the table that can maybe inspire somebody else to build on it. But at the end, it has to be a community effort. We all have to identify what our weaknesses are, what our strengths are, and decide how we're going to move forward. Because what's happening now has been happening over and over and over. It started out in 1917. They started race riots and marching. And we still rioting and marching today. We need to get a new narrative.
These are very wise words. Thank you, Larry Brewer. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did.
Okay, I did. I enjoyed myself. And thank you for inviting me. This is an opportunity that I'm grateful for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.